Hello.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Island Council members and members of the Central Committee. Rolando Wilson, Vito Charles, Saskia Matthew, Julio Every. Island Registrar, Ms. Akila Levinstone. Member of the Executive Council, Commissioner Bruce Zegers. Island Secretary, civil servants, and to the general public, whether here today or viewing via live stream. Welcome to the Central Committee meeting of Tuesday, May 26, 2026. Before going into the agenda points, allow me to mention the absence of Commissioner Everton Heiliger, who is absent with notice. Also, Governor Johnson will be joining us soon after. Today we have 8 points on the agenda. Point 1 was the opening. Before going into the approval of the agenda for the council members, we agreed in an information market that the language policy would be removed from the agenda today to allow more time for feedback to be incorporated. I therefore would like to remove it from today's agenda, and it will be added to the following Central Committee meeting in June. This would bring the agenda points to 7 instead of 8. I now look to the council members for the approval of the remaining agenda. We now move on to agenda point 3, which is the approval of the minutes. And we have no minutes at this time to approve. Agenda point number 4, citizens' right to speak on agenda points. No requests by inhabitants have been received, so we can therefore move on to agenda point 5, which is oral question rounds, and this is concerning announced questions from the Island Council, incoming correspondence during the period of November 1st, 2025 to April 10th, 2026. This is in line with Article 18 of the Rules of Procedure of the Island Council meeting. There's 4 points that fall under this, and I will name them out. It's 5.1, Island Council incoming and outgoing correspondence. 5.2, Executive Council decision list. 5.3, written questions to the Executive Council in line with Article 35. And 5.4, answers to written questions to the Executive Council in line with Article 35 as well. There were no flag questions from the previous meeting during this period, so therefore we can move on to agenda point 6, which is the Island Council Proposal 2026.2, First Budget Amendment and First Quarter Implementation Report 2026. I first give the floor to Commissioner Zegers.
Thank you, Chair Lady, and good afternoon, council members, colleagues, those in Tribune and following via social media. I'd first like to start out by giving an overview of the first budget amendment. Today I am presenting the first quarter implementation report and first budget amendment for 2026 for the public entity SEBA. First, I would like to briefly explain the purpose of this document and why it is important. This report is more than a financial exercise. It serves as an important governance and accountability tool. It provides us with a transparent overview of the activities and the financial developments during the first quarter of the year, while also giving insight into progress, deviations, and areas requiring attention. The purpose is to ensure that we maintain a clear picture of where we stand financially and operationally, allowing timely adjustments and informed decision-making throughout the year. This document continues our commitment to improving transparency and strengthening financial oversight within the public entity and is a legal requirement because of the FinBES. It allows us not only to evaluate where we are today, but also to identify where we need to make adjustments moving forward. I would also like to note that this report has been reviewed and approved by the CFT, who happens to be here today, and reflects our continued efforts towards strengthening financial governance and management practices. Over the past period, the CFT's recommendations have primarily focused on strengthening our overall financial management. Key areas highlighted include maintaining a healthy liquidity position, protecting resilience capital, improving monitoring and execution of planned investments, and increasing transparency in financial reporting. One of the important recommendations was to provide greater clarity in financial reporting and more detailed insights into expenditure categories, while also improving the way financial obligations are reflected into our reporting processes. In response to these recommendations, a number of actions have already been incorporated into this report. One significant improvement is the clearer distinction between expenditures financed through the free allowance and those financed through special purpose grants. This creates a more transparent picture of our financial position and helps provide a better understanding of how different funding streams support our operations and projects. Additionally, efforts continue to improve investment planning and project execution through stronger departmental coordination and more realistic planning practices. While work concerning the inclusion of financial obligations is still at an early stage, assessments are underway to determine how these can be incorporated into future reporting within our current financial systems. As a result, members will continue to see these improvements reflected in future implementation reports and budget amendments as we further strengthen the completeness and reliability of our reporting processes. With regard to financial management, I would like to highlight that maintaining sound financial management remains one of our primary objectives. Financial management is not simply about balancing revenues and expenditures. It is about ensuring that resources are managed responsibly, risks are monitored carefully, and that we maintain the flexibility necessary to address both planned and unexpected developments. Closely connected to this is our liquidity position. Maintaining adequate liquidity is essential for ensuring that a public entity can continue to meet its obligations and sustain operations effectively. A healthy liquidity position allows us to continue financing projects, absorb unexpected pressures, and maintain stability within the organization. Continued monitoring of liquidity remains a key priority and an important point of attention moving forward. Turning specifically to the first budget amendment, I would like to explain what forms the main component of this amendment. The largest portion of this amendment does not arise from significant changes in operational policy or major new expenditure items. Instead, the amendment largely reflects adjustments between the free allowance and special purpose grants. The free allowance primarily supports the general operational and departmental activities of the public entity. These are the resources used to fund our day-to-day responsibility and policy objectives. Special purpose grants, on the other hand, are earmarked funds provided for specific projects, programs, and objectives. Throughout the year, additional grants may become available, budgets may be finalized, or project funding may be adjusted. This amendment, therefore, primarily reflects the incorporation and alignment of those funding streams to ensure that the budget accurately reflects current realities. In practical terms, the amendment is largely administrative and technical in nature, ensuring that our financial records align with actual funding allocations and implementation needs. It improves the accuracy of our budget and provides a more realistic representation of our planned activities for the remainder of the year. With regard to the specific details of the first budget amendment, the total amendment amounts to $4.3 million, of which just over $4 million relates to special purpose grants and $218,000 relates to the regular budgetary changes under the free allowance. The amendment is therefore predominantly driven by technical and administrative adjustments rather than new policy initiatives or additional structural expenditures. The free allowance adjustment mainly reflects operational changes such as salary corrections resulting from the collective labor agreement addendum, allocations associated with the organizational and community activities including Carnival, the annual Civil Servants event, the Governor's Farewell and inauguration activities, as well as reserve releases supporting initiatives such as the library and the Nature Environmental Policy Plan. The larger special purpose grant component is primarily associated with project-related initiatives and earmarked funding streams, including digitalization initiatives, capacity strengthening for permitting and supervision, educational programs, infrastructure maintenance projects, harbor-related works, water and utility projects, social initiatives, housing developments, and environmental projects under the NEP framework. These grant amendments are budget neutral in nature, meaning corresponding revenues and expenditures are adjusted simultaneously and therefore do not create additional pressure on the island's regular operating budget. Rather, they represent a restructuring restructuring and alignment of project funding to improve transparency and strengthen the separation between general operational funding and earmarked project financing in accordance with the CFT recommendations. In closing, I would like to take this time to again thank the finance team for putting together such a thorough report, and also make mention of the efforts from the various departments that also contribute towards making it a very complete and informative report about the activities during the course of the first quarter. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Zegers. Before going into the questions, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Island Governor and Chairman of the Island Council, Jonathan Johnson, who has just joined us. We now go into the question time. Island Council Member Matthews sent in questions in advance, so I would pass over the floor to her. And for the other council members, if you have follow-up questions based on the responses, you have the opportunity to do so after. I now give the floor to Island Council Member Matthew.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues, and good afternoon to everyone here in the hall and everyone following online. As I was reviewing the first budget amendment 2026 and the accompanying implementation report, I noticed several areas where clarity, transparency, and execution details are still lacking. And this was reinforced by the letter from the CFT that states that the amendment is fine, but execution, planning realism, and transparency remain weak spots. My questions today are therefore focused on ensuring that the Island Council and the community have a complete and accurate understanding of progress, delays, and financial management practices. The report states that departments are being encouraged to enhance the quality and timelines of their project planning, but it does not explain how this is being done. So, what are the steps, tools, or internal processes being taken to improve planning quality and timelines? And are any capacity measures being implemented to support departments in meeting these planning expectations? In the report, it talks about the free allowance being the section. The free allowance section now focuses on policy plan adjustments, newly introduced goals, and any deviations in general operations relative to objectives set out in the multi-annual budget 2026 to 2029. If certain departments are not represented in this section, it indicates that all activities are progressing as planned, with no adjustments or challenges reported for Q1. So from my understanding of the explanation from the finance team, and then looking at the multi-annual budget, most projects happen later than Q1. And I think saying that all activities are progressing as planned is a bit misleading. So maybe this can be worded differently in future reports. Oh. Sorry. On page 10 in the report, under the Black Rocks Harbor project, the completion date moved from December 2026 to Q1 of 2027. So what are the specific delays? What specific delays is the contractor faced in? Are there cost implications, additional claims, or contract penalties associated with this delay? What risks does the delay create for the remaining phases of the project, including financial, operational, or contractor performance risk? On page 11 for the St. John's project, so the gym, technical center, and enrichment center, I noticed 2 of the projects got extra funding, but I also noticed that all 3 projects are delayed. So can the Executive Council clarify why the design, development, and tendering for the enrichment center are only now taking place in 2026, given that construction was originally planned to begin in 2026 and has now moved to 2027? Are the delays across the gym, technical center, and enrichment center primarily due to internal capacity constraints, procurement processes, contractor issues, or other external factors? And can we receive a consolidated timeline for all 3 projects? On the general enforcement capacity on page 12, It states that a vacancy for a new enforcer was unfilled and the budget was repurposed for training. So I was just wondering, was this vacancy publicly advertised? If not, why not? And then, yeah, based on the fact that the budget is being repurposed for training, I'm wondering if training wouldn't be planned if the salary wasn't repurposed. So if we did hire someone, then there would be no training, just for clarity. On page 16, under the tourism taxation system, it states that investigation into accommodation tax enforcement is to be conducted. And I would like to know what kind of investigation is being conducted, who is leading it, what is the scope and timeline of this investigation, and what are the enforcement gaps that exist. Under the culture policy plan, page 17, there's been a delay. It was originally planned for 2025, and now May 2026. And I'm just wondering if the May 2026 timeline is still on schedule. Page 18, absolute care, daycare. Can the Executive Council provide a clear summary of the inspection findings referenced in this section, specifically those relevant to Sabre's childcare facilities? Can the Island Council receive the advisory report for Sabre's childcare location or a redacted version if full publication is restricted due to privacy rules? And what specific staffing requirements arise from the inspection findings, and what gaps were identified that require additional personnel? Page 30, with expanding and professionalizing the absolute care and the BSO, it states that daycare is at capacity and a temporary solution is room dividers. Now, does this comply with legal space requirements for childcare? And what is the timeline for the new childcare center? And what is the contingency plan if capacity issues worsen? On page 33, for the food subsidy, the strategies and implementation, what are the eligibility criteria for the landlord subsidy? How many households benefit from this? How are social housing rents calculated? And is this subsidy temporary or structural? On page 35, on the harbor fees, they mentioned that the revenues, there was no entries, I believe. So my questions would be, why are the revenue entries delayed? Is this a staffing issue or a departmental reporting issue? What steps are being taken to ensure timely booking? On page 36, on the building permits, I noticed that there was only one building permit issued in the first quarter of 2026. So my question is, how are new constructions monitored? Because, yeah, if you drive around the island, there's a lot of construction taking place. And also on page 36, on the driver's license, why were there no driving exams conducted earlier this year? I understood that is no longer under the Census Department. Please explain. Page 37, under the crane rental. This is one of the topics that comes up a lot. But I'd like to know who is responsible for submitting crane usage reports. Is there a logbook or tracking system? How is billing verified? And has this issue occurred in previous years? On page 53, salaries and social charges. Can the Executive Council specify which positions remain unfilled and whether these vacancies affect service delivery? Can the Executive Council clarify whether the under-realization of salaries is expected to normalize later in the year once the 13-month and new hires are processed? Are there recruitment delays or capacity constraints contributing to the unfilled positions? Are any of the unfilled positions linked to grant-funded or time-sensitive projects? And last, but definitely not least, page 55. The culture budget is increased to support the planning and execution of Carnival 2026. Can the Executive Council specify how much of the culture budget increase is allocated to Carnival 2026 and what specific activities or costs this covers? Given that 2026 marks the 50th anniversary of Carnival, can the Executive Council provide an update on the planning status, including the schedule, organizing structure, and key activities? When can the community expect a public announcement or schedule for Carnival 2025, considering the milestone year and the associated budget increase? Sorry? 2026. Oh, sorry, 2026. Are there any additional financial implications expected for Carnival 2026 beyond what is included in this budget amendment? That's it for me.
That concludes, excuse me, the questions by Island Council Member Matthew. I now go to Commissioner Zegers for the responses.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Seeing that my colleague isn't here and several of the questions also relate to his portfolio, I would like to suggest that those questions either be answered in writing or, again, in a public meeting in June. I don't know, whichever the Island Council prefers, but I think it's best he has more insight into things at the daycare and the culture than I would have.
Island Council Member Matthew, how would you prefer the questions be answered, in writing or in the meeting of June?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In all honesty, I would prefer the questions be answered today in this meeting. Why? Obviously, I understand that the other commissioner is not present, but since the Executive Council is collective leadership, then, and all the things discussed in the implementation report are based on base decisions, then I think that any member of the Executive Council should be able to answer. But, yeah.
Commissioner Zegers, are you able to answer any questions today? If not, then of course the only other option is that it's either answered in writing or, but if you can, please let me know so I know how to proceed.
Yeah, fair point from the council member, of course, but I could also just read the answers that has been prepared by the team that support the questions, but the actual insight, the weekly involvement, especially with things at the daycare, I can read it, but to say that I can add context to it would be rather difficult for me to do because I'm not involved in those regular discussions. There's other areas, like for example, Carnival, I can touch briefly onto things like that because I was involved in a meeting last week about it, so I can give a bit of an update there. But, very specific questions about portfolios that, I am not involved with daily, I think it's an injustice for me to just to simply read off an answer that's being prepared by somebody else that I don't necessarily know, the details about it. So my preference would still be that they either get answered in writing or in the public meeting in June.
Understood, Commissioner Zegers. You did mention that you may be able to give some insight into the questions surrounding Carnival. So perhaps if you can do that, you can just give insight into that. And for the points that you can, again, I ask Island Council Member Matthew, do you prefer that those be answered in writing or in the meeting of June 23rd, which is the following meeting?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to ask a clarifying question. If these answers are delivered in writing, would it be the same answers that you have right now that you could read off?
Commissioner Zegers?
Yeah, that's hard for me to say. I also get answers to questions, and I adjust the answers the way that I see it from a policy side or a political side. So, I can't speak for my colleague that isn't here, that, he wouldn't also look at those answers that's right now in its, very raw format and not make adjustments. So again, I just I don't feel comfortable putting words into another portfolio's mouth, so to speak, and deliver a message that yeah, I haven't had time to necessarily review.
Thank you, Commissioner. Again, well, for both of you, remember to turn off your mics. Okay, thank you. Again, Island Council Member Matthew, how would you like to proceed?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Zegers, for the clarity. Then I have one more question then. What would be the timeline of getting these answers? Because technically, we have to approve the amendment today. It's not going to change anything, but also these are, most of the things that come up are also pressing issues, and I really would like, then if we get anything right in, that it could happen quite soon, before the next meeting.
Can we agree that the questions can be received, well, the answers can be received in the short term?
Yeah, I just looked at the Island Secretary who indicated that perhaps we can have a better formatted set of answers by Monday.
Okay, thank you.
And again, where I give clarity or some sort of answer, I'll try my best to do so.
Okay. So then the way we proceed is that Island Council Member Matthew and of course the entire council will receive the questions in writing by Monday. Is that clear? Okay, we now move on to Commissioner Zegers, where he can answer the questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. There was the first question about how departments report and encouraging to enhance quality and timeliness of project planning. There was 2 questions about that. And at this stage, no additional formal tools or dedicated capacity measures have been introduced specifically for project planning. The reference to departments being encouraged primarily relates to an adjustment in the planning and control approach toward financial monitoring and reporting. Historically, the focus has largely been on identifying and reporting deviations from approved budgets. However, greater emphasis is now being placed on forecasting, so trying to tell a bit of the picture about what's upcoming rather than what happened in the past. I think that's important for these types of documents. So to say that how, it's more capacity or more stricter measures, it's more about encouraging that there's a bit more thoroughness in the way that the reporting is done, especially that rather than just talking about what's happened during the first quarter, that we also speak about, what's planned for the quarters ahead. There was also a question about the free allowance section about wording. That's something that we will take note for future amendments. With regards to the Black Rock Harbor project, there was a few questions about that. One of the bigger ones, I believe, is about the delays, and that's something that has, of course, our attention. There was many logistical challenges. There were things with the work permits, because it's many of those. And for the past weeks, we've all seen the weather, and not working in a protected environment. You're working in the open seas in a very rough area to start. That causes many delays. I have one update I can give today. They were waiting on a bit of a weather break, that the first barge load of rocks can come from St. Kitts. That's scheduled for tomorrow. That's significant for the project because without that, they can't continue on the core of the breakwater. So once those rocks come in, we should start to see a bit more progress, especially onto the core of the main breakwater. And I think in general, although I'm sure lots of planning because, the extent of the project is quite large. I do believe that the contractor may have underestimated the challenges of building a harbor in, these types of environments. Not just the weather environment, but also the business part of it with things like work permits and whatever have you. As for additional costs or contract penalties, the project is still expected to stay within budget. The budget includes several reservations and a contingency to cover inflation and unforeseen costs. The construction contract defines how to deal with the cost increases, delays, etc. The contractor can submit claims for unexpected circumstances or costs. The contract describes the procedure for claims and how they are reviewed. Elements that are expected to impact the budget are increased fuel prices and global tariffs. On the other hand, the contractor finds that a public entity can claim damages if the contractor cannot deliver the project on time. And then there was a question about risk with delays. And rightfully so, the project should have been finished by the end of this year. But we are going to allow that a contractor can now work during the hurricane season. This was not the case in the beginning. And by doing so, they also have to take on the additional risk with presenting a plan of how they plan to safeguard the people in the event of a hurricane, equipment, but then they also have to take out a private insurance that would cover any potential damages if work continues during the hurricane season. But by doing so, we gain several months, because if they have to stop and then start again in December, we're looking at even bigger delays. There were questions about the school project. Technically, that's not part of my portfolio, but I can give some insight into this because it's a bit of infrastructure. With regards to the enrichment center, the process for the design started in 2025 when we got the funding through the regional deal. The initial cost estimates were higher than what the budget could make available for that project. So they had to go back to the drawing board to make adjustments, to maybe even look at a scope, what was nice to have, what was neat to have, in order that could fit within the budget. And that, of course, caused some delays. But then also there's a reality that, with the two big projects that's already ongoing in St. John's, namely the gym project and the technical school, it wouldn't necessarily be possible to have, a third big project happening in that vicinity all at the same time due to limitations with parking. You can also imagine, it's a bit of a distraction for the school areas there. So that was also taken in consideration. And the delays with the gym and the technical center, that was because of contract negotiations. Of course, contractors always go much higher than what the budget allows, at least most of the time. So it was, negotiating how to get a better price, how to make sure everything fit. There were also some delays with some of the funding agencies. We can't necessarily start until all the money is, certain. And that caused, I believe it's something like a 6-month delay. And then for a timeline, the start of the gym and the technical center was February of this year, and the handover is expected in October of 2027. The enrichment center, the start date now is planned for July 2027. And the finalized construction is planned for Q3 of 2028. There's questions about enforcement that would be answered by the governor. Also questions about the tourism taxation system and about an investigation. That was more so to see about the viability of introducing the entry tax. I believe a presentation, or maybe even more than one, had been given to the Island Council at the time, where it was basically a joint approach between SEBA and Statia to see, what was possible, how it could be done, how a structure would look. And since then, Statia actually pulled out. They feel that's, it would make their product seem even more expensive than what it already is. And, there's also, there also seems to be significant momentum that St. Martin is going to do the same thing. And, we're a two-stop destination. We depend highly on St. Martin. And, already it's rather expensive to get here. And when you implement an entry tax of that significance, I think it's also maybe not the best approach, at least not right now. So together, we are looking to see, how we can improve compliance with the taxes that exist, and also together with the SCF about the nature fees to see how that can be better improved. And as for a timeline, we hope, of course, that, we also depend on the SCF because they need to provide information, especially with how we adjust the nature fees, that an updated draft ordinance can be presented to the Island Council somewhere in Q3 with the goal of implementation in January 2027. And as for who's leading this, it is the Domain Manager of Economic Affairs and Mobility and the head of the Tourist Bureau. The Culture Policy Plan, I'm not too versed into that. The daycare questions, I'm not really that involved. Also not so involved with the rental subsidies. The harbor fees, why are the revenue entries delayed in the first quarter? This was because the harbor master was out attending 2 workshop trainings during that period. Staffing issues, not necessarily staffing issues, but we are looking into having more of an office manager for the harbor office. That is something that probably would be in the draft budget for 2027, so that we can have someone focusing on operations and someone focusing more on the administrative part of it. I believe this is even more important with a new harbor being built. With regards to the building permits, it only mentions that there was only 1 building permit for Q1 of 2026. But again, this is more about reporting. There were actually 5 permits, but it just shows up right in the beginning of Q2. So although it says 1, and in reality it's 5 more. It's just the cutoff date is very strict with the reporting. We also will have 2 people come from the ODNL, from the Netherlands, the Omgevingsdienst, that is going to support the spatial development team to look at constructions that currently don't have building permits, to see how we can get those constructions done in a more legal way that the documentation fits what's being built. And I believe that's planned for sometime in the coming weeks. So we should have 2 people that's going to support that department to go around and check all the buildings that don't have permits at this time. With regards to the crane rental, there is a working agreement with Workmonster for the operations and maintenance of the crane. And as such, Workmonster is responsible for submitting the usage reports. There is a logbook, and this is presented to the finance department. Then they verify it, and they issue the invoices to whoever has been renting the services of the crane. And there has, unfortunately, been delays in the past where this information has not necessarily been coming on time, but of course we try to promote the idea that there's deadlines, this information is important, it does need to come in on time. So that's something that's still being worked out. Salaries and social charges, I believe the governor will address that. And then lastly, and as the council lady said, last but not least, Carnival. There was a meeting, I believe it was last week, towards the end of last week, with the promoters who have found it very difficult to get sponsorship. So that goes to the final question actually into this round about any additional financial implications. And they are seeking some sort of financial sponsorship or a financial injection that can help bridge the gaps and ensuring that they can have their nights, because it's especially everything that's going on in the world, sponsorship is it's always been quite low, and I believe this year is even lower. And because there's no certainty from the promoters, and it's not that I'm throwing promoters under the bus, but you need to have promoters before you can actually issue a schedule. So there is a tentative schedule in place. It's just a matter of ensuring that the promoters are fully into having their shows, and once that's done, I believe a schedule would be released very shortly, because I believe the schedule is made. And promoters are looking for an additional amount of like 5,000 each per promoter, and that ensures that they can meet the financial obligations. But that is the holdup right now with the releasing of the schedule.
Commissioner Zega, that concludes your part, I believe. Now we go on to Governor Johnson.
Good afternoon, Chair Leedy. Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the Island Council, the Central Committee. Page 12, the question was posed regarding the general enforcement capacity. There was a vacancy which was unfilled. And the question was this advertised, and why? If not, why not? It was not advertised because the vacancy text needs to be changed and reassessed. This is related to what the commissioner was referring to as well with the omgevingsdienst. There's a new law which passed, the EABBES, and we're still having conversations. Last week we had conversations with them, what would be needed in order to have supervision and enforcement done the right way. These are also ongoing talks with the Ministry of Internal Affairs. So because of that, the vacancy had to be, the text had to be changed and reassessed, which is ongoing. The monies which were allocated were repurposed for training, and you asked if trainings wouldn't be planned. There was, at the time, not sufficient budget available. So with that salary funds, it was repurposed for the training. And this is to cover the cost of those tailored and personalized enforcement program. So that, it made that possible. So that's general enforcement. Now I go on to the driving license. The question was posed about why were there no exams conducted earlier in the year? This was due to staffing issues, which we are busy resolving. And also you asked about, because driver's license always fell at the census department. We're also busy reassessing this to determine which department would be responsible. So there has been driving exams in the past few months, but we're still busy seeking which department would be the best to deal with this. Then the questions about salaries and social changes. You asked if we could specify which positions remain unfilled and whether these vacancies affect service delivery. As we have all seen, there have been various vacancies published by the public entity. Some are in progress to be filled, and some are not filled. And in general, there is an issue on our island with regard to housing, meaning the housing of persons. If we recruit them from abroad, even if they're locals who now live abroad want to return. So that does impact some of the vacancies which we have. But a lot of the persons that are recruited are on their way and such, but they're busy finalizing. There was legal advisors, there's advisor for information manager. The big one was the pedagogical employees at a daycare. The start dates for those are pending. Some should be coming and some are here, but yeah, housing. Airport security officers, there was 2 of those are in progress. In Executive Council, we dealt with 2 last week. 1 will be filled and then another 1 is in progress. Project manager of construction, that's in progress. The island registrar administrative assistants, as you all know, that's in progress. HR, the human resource advisor, that person should begin in July. One of the issues affecting these things at HRM is that can contribute to the delays is the capacity at HRM, because meetings have to be scheduled, you have to plan with the persons, you have to hold interviews, then you have to advise on the recruitment process related to the Executive Council proposals. And then after that, you have to follow up with the negotiations for the salaries and such. So all in all, maybe it would be an idea that we could provide an overview from start to finish, what all it entails, how long it entails. I think what I could do here is say that we could, after this, provide an overview from start to finish, who, what, when, and how, and then it's clear for everyone. That is the salaries. Was there any more for me? No, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. We will now first proceed with the follow-up questions by Island Councilmember Matthew.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to clarify about the investigation under the tourism taxation system. So that on that page in the report, on page 16, it starts off talking about the tourism master plan. So what the commissioner spoke about with the visitor tax being looked into from Sabo and Stacia. But the last sentence says, and that's what I was referring to, that the focus will instead, so instead of focusing on the visitor tax, the focus will instead remain on continuing the investigation into accommodation tax enforcement and the development of a nature fee framework. So I took that to understand, because I know we had some issues getting the accommodation taxes. So that was actually what my questions were in regards to. So not the visitor tax, but the accommodation tax. And for just to touch on the vacancies, I think having the entire process is not actually the issue, because obviously, you know, things have to be done, have to be done behind the scenes. So people have to arrive, they have to have interviews, things have to be negotiated. But I think if you look at the extent of the questions that I'm asking today, and I could refer back to my intro, it was because of the lack of transparency on some of these items. So when the community reads these things, they have no idea what we are actually talking about, what we're spending money on, what vacancies we're talking about. You know, so just for the future to be clearer, because yeah, I could have also not asked the questions, and then we wouldn't get the explanations, and then yeah, the community wouldn't know. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Island Councilmember Matthew. So what I suggest we do, that you answer the follow-up questions of Island Councilmember Matthew, and then I will give the opportunity to the other Island Council members to address follow-up questions based on your response.
Okay, thank you, Chair Lady. Okay, the question's a bit more clear now about the investigation. I believe it has been discussed before that the collection right now doesn't happen within our organization, but it is being done by the tax department, and with that brings its own set of challenges. So right now we are busy checking to see, you know, what is possible, or investigating to see what is possible, to see how that can be brought from the tax department back to the local receivers. I believe, you know, a move like that would allow us to have more insight into who's paying what and for what period. The way it's done right now, the information is just very basic. It says, for example, accommodation X paid X amount on this date. So it doesn't necessarily give any type of detail what it's based on, for what period. I believe, yeah, that's difficult for those that are paying it, because, yeah, it has a lot of question marks behind it, but then also for us to administer it to make sure that there is compliance. So there's where the investigation stems from, and that's so far not been an easy discussion point, especially with the ballasting dates. Yeah, the information isn't always forthcoming. The willingness to see how we can make it possible that that task is transferred back to us is also being so far quite difficult. So that's something that's ongoing, and to be quite honest, there's not a point that I can say, well, this is the end date when that task would be transferred back to the public entity.
Thank you, Commissioner Zegas. I believe the next follow-up question was for Governor. No?
Well, it
It was a
wasn't a
remark?
question,
Okay.
but it was a statement, but I would also, I agree with your synopsis because, you know, over the years, the public entity has grown quite substantial. We have, you know, I'm getting down to the end, but in my 18 years when we started was 100 and something, now we're up to 200 and something. So as you rightfully said, the community is probably wondering why, and then the how, and then the who. But why have we grown? You know, more tasks have come upon us. For example, the nature environment policy. You know, we have the persons who help with the reforestation, we have the nature, we have different things. You know, why did that come into being? So in general, the organization has grown quite some over the years. So I think what you're alluding to as well, the community needs to understand why we have grown to what we have grown. And then, you know, obviously you have to have backups, you know, and with a BSO, you know, we had issues there in the after school and all the other departments as well. So I think that is a rightful comment which you make. As an organization, we need to take the community along in the process, why we increase the number of civil servants, and then how, and then who. So thank you for that comment.
Thank you, Governor. I now look to the other members of the Island Council. Do you have any follow-up questions? Island Council Member Charles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have a few follow-up questions in regards to 3 points. One was the entry tax or the investigation on the visitor tax, because I think a few statements were made that sparked my curiosity. And it was the idea of possibly not moving ahead with the entry tax. And I'm just, you know, a bit curious about that because as an Island Council member, Matthew also expressed, and the commissioner as well, it's quite difficult to get insight into transparency. When you look at other destinations around the world, I saw a video recently where one destination said about $70 million goes uncollected in relation to Airbnb taxes. And makes me question, okay, well, if they're talking about Airbnb tax, but we just talk about hotel taxes and how much we should be generating, is there a number that we've estimated beyond the budget for a realistic figure of what we should be collecting in accommodation tax? Then there was this discussion about the people not wanting to pay an entry tax. And I'm not sure if that's really the case or where we would get that idea from. Because it appears to me that most people, they book their ticket and then they're confronted with the reality of when they're going to have what they have to pay to get to the destination. So if that's the idea that it's going to be deterrent, how are we determining that? In fact, you know, I was just recently in Aruba, and I didn't even, they have a $20 sustainability fee that you have to pay up front. I remember I went to another destination, and then you had to pay, and this is a destination that doesn't even use dollars, and then you had to pay $33 as an entry fee. So I think there's quite a number of destinations around the world where this is a reality. And if you look at it in relation to the, I guess the accommodation tax, the bigger question is, how do we see tourists contributing to the burden that they place on communities? Because I think that's the actual question. You know, you see it in St. Martin, people are asking, hey, what is all this tourism for if it's not contributing to the development of our island? And I can't see and I can't feel what it's going towards. And I think that's the question we ask. Is the burden of the destination, of coming to the destination, being placed at the right place? It's not only the discussion in St. Martin, it's discussion in the Netherlands. We have that in Amsterdam, you have it in several places where tourists are, you know, they are welcome, but they also have an impact on the society and in the community. So that, I think, is the relevant question. And more so, any tax should answer that. And also, and when I think about the, another thing, when we think about the statistics, I'm wondering, how do we get insight about the types of tourists that we get and where they're from and, all the demographical information. And I realized the other day that we also have a tool that we don't use, and that's the exit tax, because everybody has to pay it right now anyhow. So it might be an idea that, just like in other islands, that when they're leaving, they have to fill in a form in order to, when they're paying it, so that way we get some information into the statistics regarding the tourists on our island. So I'm just curious what the commissioner thinks about that, or the executive council thinks about that. In relation to Carnival, I think I definitely understand the concerns within the community, within the promoters, because even when I was recently on St. Martin for Carnival, I heard a lot of people in the community talking about how difficult it has been to get sponsors, especially with the start of the Iran war earlier this year. And I do realize, I have been on the Carnival Committee over the years. I do see that the burden, the financial burden, has increased tremendously since then. So I do think, as a community, we have to be a bit more mindful of what is the cost of our cultural events. If we want cultural events, there's a cost to bear, and we have to ask ourselves, what do we want? Are we willing to bear it? And that means if we want to see a festival that lasts as long as this one does, and it's 50 years, if we want to see it in another 50 years, we're going to talk about what structural costs we are willing to bear to ensure that it can happen. I know a lot of people are sometimes disappointed when they don't see like a major artist from who is very popular if they don't show up on the event list. But in reality, those artists are also asking top dollar for their performances. And so if we want to have them here, we also have to be willing to pay top dollar. And we always, and clearly, it's difficult to even entertain that. So I just, I just wonder, how do we have that conversation with the community and to make them realize the actual financial burden of organizing Carnival. And my final point was in relation to the budget amendment, but how do we communicate the information? Because I've asked before that it be more in line with the governing plan, so it's more thematic than it is just line by line, just listing off line items, and that we focus more on saying what we have done in a specific area. And I think that also contributes to the better understanding by the public of how, of what the work that we're doing. The governor mentioned that, yes, we hire a number of people, and people ask why, but I also think what's important to know is the work that we've been doing. I think the island does a lot of work. You can't meet somebody that comes to Saba and say that they are not impressed by what they see. And when you look at what the organization does and how it has developed over the years, I also am quite impressed. But I think it's just about how we translate that in informing people about what we do. And I think more efforts need to be dedicated towards that.
Thank you, Councilmember Charles. Commissioner, just a quick question. Would you prefer to answer that or continue the rounds? Continue. Island Councilmember Every, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Lady, and good afternoon, everyone. My question was similar to what Councilman Charles was asking in regards to the accommodation taxes. As it stands right now, because I remember a few meetings before, indeed, I understood that SEF do collect the accommodation taxes. So in reference to the question that Vito asked in terms of the amount, I think that would give us a clear indication. So my question is, if this investigation is ongoing, is there an end date? Because, like I said, a few meetings before, I've also asked this question, and I'm very curious about that, because if the tax department is giving difficulties in giving out the information, I think as an island, we also have a responsibility to collect the money that is owed. So yeah, that's my, my question on that one.
Thank you, Island Council Member Every. I also just have one follow-up question. We are entering the hurricane season, and I hope this season is also kind to us. And my question is surrounding the harbor project. Of course, Commissioner, you alluded to a plan being in place and those costs being completely covered by the project managers and so forth. But my question is in regards to the container housing. I would just like to know, are these containers in the current structure hurricane-proof? For major hurricanes especially, but all hurricanes? And if yes, amazing. If not, what plans are in place to mitigate this in the prevention phase? And that concludes for me. So Commissioner, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Lady, and also thank you for the questions, follow-up questions. I'll start with the nature and the accommodation taxes, and I think I'll start with the last question from Councilmember Every. There's a big difference between the nature fee and the accommodation tax. So right now, the accommodation tax is the one that's being collected by the tax department, and the nature fee is done mainly through the hotels, and then that goes directly to the Conservation Foundation. So there's, not much insight from the public entity into exactly how much those are or even should be. And the same can be, like, for example, when a yacht comes in, that's paid, for example, like a mooring fee is paid directly to the SEF upon entry. I think what's important to know, and this has been an ongoing discussion now, not just for a week or two, but I would say this discussion goes back even years already, with the Seba Conservation Foundation about the level of the nature fees. Because if you can make a comparison to the level of the fees on Seba versus, what's being charged, even within the region, we're selling ourselves short. It's not to say that, for example, that, the few tourists that we get, that a SCF will all of a sudden become a wealthy organization. But with more adequate fees, they should see, more stable revenues coming in, which allows them to do things in a bit more of a structural way. For example, on Bonaire or Aruba, where you have such an influx of tourism, and that's well managed, like through organizations like Stanapa. The nature organizations down there, they do quite well by having, a well-organized nature fee in place. And one of the things that also come up is not just hotels, as Councilmember Charles mentioned. We also have several rental cottages here on the island. It's not always done through like an Airbnb, but by, private individuals that just manage cottages. So, knowing the exact amount of what it can be is difficult to determine. The number right now is based on the previous year experience. So it's not based on some, sophisticated type of forecasting, but it's based on, the previous year experience. So we don't necessarily know how much it can be. Perhaps as an idea to do an inventory, and although there is a listing of properties that is rented, but then you need to have an idea about, what's the occupancy rate. You can get at, I think, rather easy from the hotels, but I don't know if you get at, with the same ease from the private properties that are being rented out on an ad hoc basis. With regards to, the entry tax being a deterrent, I think it's difficult to have that conversation now, especially, when we speak about, for example, the high winter prices. And of course, it's, people may book their tickets in advance, but it's also, a bit shocking when you say, for example, well, you have to pay $50 to enter Seba. When, especially for some people, it might not always be clear where that $50 goes. Right now, when you pay a nature fee, it's paid, and it's explained as a nature fee that, you can see that on an invoice rather than having a total upon arrival. I do believe had Stacia continued being part of that discussion, and, this is also not just, looking at Stacia. This was also something that was said by the company, Roberto Cruz, what's his name again? Roberto Cruz, I believe he was, or something like that, from Aruba. Tico, right, that, you know, carried out this study at the time, you know, he also indicated that, you know, his professional opinion would be that it might be difficult to implement if St. Martin did a similar tax, because it just seems like a buildup of things. And, you know, we sat in a meeting, the last one that was on Saba with the SSS Islands, and, you know, there wasn't necessarily a willingness to have much cooperation. St. Martin's for St. Martin. And, you know, I do believe that how there would be more possibilities. For example, if passengers were in transit to Saba, that, you know, that fee would be waived. But realistically, is that something that St. Martin is going to do? You know, those are the discussions that I still think needs to happen before we would even, move forward with having such an entry tax. You know, having to pay something on arrival on St. Martin and then on arrival again to Saba becomes a bit much, I believe, for many. Also a question about statistics. Right now the information that we gather from tourists coming in, unfortunately, is limited. And, you know, you know, in many areas we've gone up since the transition. You know, we can see big improvements, but in also many areas there's much that's lacking. And, you know, I can speak about the period before the transition. We had a handful of local guys that was doing border control, things like work permits, and every month we had, you know, up-to-date information about tourist arrivals, where they came from, how long they were here for, and, you know, that was just regular, you know, civil servants that, you know, really did a good job, very efficient in what they were doing, making sure that how the information was reported. And when someone overstayed their welcome, they also knew, you know, about that, and that was reported in a timely manner as well. Now you have these very lofty and expensive organizations like CBS that, you know, doesn't even report on, you know, arrivals at the harbor. You know, you would think that, you know, the Mekana didn't exist, so we got no yachts coming to the island. And yeah, those organizations get paid quite a bit of money. It's not cheap. And so they've already been paid actually to carry out exit surveys at the ports. And, you know, months later, they still can't get this off the ground. And, you know, we find that very hard to deal with. And, you know, even from the ministry, they express their frustration that CBS isn't able to get this project moving forward, whilst they have been paid to, you know, carry out such a survey. So we are exploring right now with AZACA to do our own exit surveys and, you know, to see how we can put that into practice. I believe we can be more efficient, and of course it'd be easier to, I believe the information would be more reliable than that of CBS. I just want to mention something there. Councilmember Charles, he said a few things there about Carnival. I think that, you know, we also can't underestimate the demand for these top artists, because Saba isn't the only island that's doing, you know, events or a carnival during this period of time. So while they expect top dollar from Saba, you know, we're also competing with bigger destinations that, you know, can offer more money because they have a bigger population, the crowd size are bigger, people, you know, there's more of a revenue stream coming in for promoters just because of the population size. You know, we often get compared to Statia, and we say, well, Saba and Statia is the same size. And that's, you know, not necessarily true. You know, Statia has a population of something like 12 or 1,300 people more than us. And while that doesn't sound like a lot, that's a big deal. And, you know, that also shows when, you have events like Carnival, you have a bigger turnout, you have more people contributing towards the show. And, you know, that does make a big difference. So, you know, people here always feel that, you know, it's so expensive to pay for these artists. But, yeah, they get more money elsewhere than